Hello and welcome to the Groupthink Podcast. Your vulnerable host, Tyler, is currently dying of flu season, so please excuse me if this ends up being the last recording. But hopefully this will be a good way to run it out, as our guest today is a guest I haven't had a chance to talk to much before, but we've run around in the same circles a lot. She is Hannah Long. She is a contributor over at the Washington Examiner, an editor at HarperCollins, and I'm probably selling her short in a lot of ways, so please feel free to add anything else to your title.
Well, I would correct one thing, is that I was actually a Weekly Standard contributor. The archives, when the Standard went under, were migrated over to the Washington Examiner, which is why all of my material shows up there. But yeah, I was a freelancer over at the Standard back in the day.
Yeah, before the tragic death. Well, when was that? Like a year or two ago, or?
It's just over a year now, because I was interviewing for the job that I'm currently in right as it was going under, like December 2018, and today was my year anniversary at this job. So.
Well, that's bittersweet, but interesting timing nonetheless. So.
Yeah, it was a weird and surreal time. I mean, for me, but I wasn't losing a job because I was just a freelancer. So it was very, very poignant and bittersweet to watch so many difficult things happening for people that I had worked with.
Sure. Did you work out of the offices, or did you just submit over online?
So I started freelancing for them when I was about 20. I had just turned 20, and I was just on Twitter one day and mentioned, hey, by the way, I was talking to John Podhoretz at the time and mentioned freelancing for the Standard. And it wasn't entirely clear in my head that he wasn't actually an editor there anymore. But the good news was that I don't know if he was the managing editor at the time, but he became managing editor. Richard Starr liked to read JPod's mentions. And so he discovered me there, messaged me, one thing led to another, and I ended up freelancing there for a few years. Between junior and senior year of college, I needed an internship to graduate. And entirely on a whim, I thought, well, what are they going to say? No? So I messaged Richard again and said, by the way, if you all need interns. And as it turns out, they didn't really tell anybody no. So that was how I ended up there over the summer of 2017, which was an exciting time to be there because the leadership had just switched over. I can't remember if that was in 2016 or 2015. Steve Hayes was the new editor-in-chief, and he was really wanting to kind of shake things up, try a real new news-based approach. He was hiring a lot of people. There was a feature, I think, either in the Post or the Times, I can't remember which, about the magazine, kind of the new directions. And so it was a really exciting time to be there, and nobody really could have seen what was right around the corner. But yeah, so I was there through that summer and did some writing, met pretty much everybody who was going to be there over the next few. There were a couple people that arrived right after I left, but pretty much met everybody. And then went back to school and graduated in May of 2018. Continued freelancing for the Standard on and off. I really wasn't doing too much that year. Just applying for jobs and stuff and going through, existential crisis of having graduated college and then, oh my gosh, now what? So also on a whim, I ended up applying for this current job that I'm in. And then I really didn't expect to get it because I didn't know anything about publishing. And lo and behold, it's fairly difficult for big publishing companies to get a hold of conservatives who live in New York City. And I wasn't living in New York City at the time, but I was willing to relocate. So that ended up being kind of what sealed the deal, besides the fact that I knew conservative media pretty well. So yeah, that was all kind of, that's my history with the Standard. I had a piece, I had two big pieces coming out right near the end of the magazine, and one piece in the final issue.
There you go. I mean, now most of those guys work for the Dispatch, right?
Well, there's kind of scattered around. There are people at the Bulwark. There are people at the Dispatch. My friend Kelly Jane Torrance just started at the New York Post. She was a senior editor at the Weekly Standard, and I just helped her move into her apartment here in New York City. Let me see, who else is it? I know that another friend is at the Spectator, Priscilla Jensen. People ended up at the Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN. So really, it's just kind of everybody scattered to the four winds. But a few of the like major players ended up at the Dispatch and the Bulwark, which is why everybody associates that with them now.
All right. Have you stayed in contact with them?
Some more than others. I knew people. I knew some people better than others, so I was staying in touch with them anyway. Every time I get back to DC, which it's been a couple of times, with people and meet up, and it's because I mean it's strange because it was such a brief period in my life that I feel a little bit bad talking about it as if like I actually worked there or something. I mean, but at the same time, it was so pivotal for me. It was something that just led to so many opportunities, and so I just kind of have this big emotional connection to it. And was really sad to see it go under and everything. And I think a lot of people thought that because I was reacting so strongly that I was losing my job or something, and I didn't. So it was a little bit weird, but I genuinely do just appreciate so much the work that place did, and there were so many good people there. I mean, it really was a good environment, and just kind of a step for me into a broader world because I grew up in a very small town, didn't have any experience with conservative media or being a writer or anything. And so just having the chance to be there for a summer was just broadened my horizons in so many ways.
I guess it's a blessing then that all that stuff ended up migrating over to the Washington Examiner, because I mean, it would be awful if all that was just kind of lost when the Standard went down.
Yeah, there was a lot of question at one point about what would happen to the archive, and there was nobody really knew what was going on. I mean, I'm not revealing any secrets by saying that the communication at the time was terrible, that nobody knew what was happening, and it was unclear whether people were going to lose jobs, whether they were going to get severance pay or not. I mean, people had to sign NDAs, I believe. I think CNN reported on that. It was very confusing, and nobody really knew what was going to happen to the archive. And then it ended up being put over on the Examiner's page. So it was a strange and dramatic situation at the time.
All right. So what would you call yourself then relative to the kind of circles we run in? Because I would say I'm, as my constant bickering with Jacob Airy would on Twitter would suggest, I would definitely fall into the critics kind of area. And when going back and reading your stuff on the Examiner, you did a lot of general cultural commentary, Doctor Who coverage.
That's the most important beat, to be clear. It's the Doctor Who beat.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I would probably say, while like probably every conservative 20-something, I thought that I was going to end up being some sort of political pundit and take over the world. What I really am passionate about is just the cultural criticism aspect. I enjoy, I mean, I can write political stuff. I do some commentary, a little bit, stuff like that. But what I do writing-wise is usually stuff talking about the arts, stuff talking about, I was talking to Terry Teachout about this, I think, on Twitter, about how, like, the reason I got into cultural criticism is because I enjoy recommending things to people. And I really do. It's just like, I love discovering new stuff and then gushing about it. And the only way to avoid inflicting that on people in real life is to write about it. So I think it's partly just a way of me taking my enthusiasm and trying to give a form to it, and not keep on going on to my siblings and my parents and talk about, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing, everybody has to watch this. And so it's an outlet, I guess.
Do you how do you channel that nowadays? Since do you have a blog specifically for it, or are you doing all your stuff through HarperCollins right now?
Well, I mean, the thing about HarperCollins is that, so I'm an editorial assistant at HarperCollins, and that entails not only editing stuff, which is not usually, as editorial assistants don't do quite as much of that, but there's a lot of administrative work. Like there's a ton of making sure that people get their checks on time, and making sure that contracts go out on time, and making sure that manuscripts get passed between people, and that all of the kind of like the checks are checked, and and all of that stuff. That, you know, like publishing companies don't actually fact check things, but sometimes it ends up being a situation where somebody needs to fact check something. I do it. Then, like, you know, people never really think about what happens when you send reprint corrections to like typos to publishing houses. But what happens is they go to me, or they go to the equivalent of me at whatever imprint the book was published by. So, you know, somebody has a book and they've discovered a typo in it, and this book was from 5 years ago, and I'm just like, okay, well, now I have to find the book, and now I have to find the page. Now I just, that's a one fun thing I do. It's a thing I do anyway. But then there's, I mean, so like, you know, organized conference. I mean, there's some secretarial work to it, you know, answering phones. It's a little bit surreal sometimes, just because you have to put you just have to put a little distance between, like, oh my gosh, you know, 1 minute I'm talking to Joe Walsh, and then the next minute I'm talking to Rand Paul or something. It's just like, that's a normal day. That's a normal thing. That's just, you know, and that's actually, that it's just a little bit surreal sometimes when you take a step back and look at it, because it's easy to become jaded sometimes, just because there's so much work and there's so much busyness every day. But then just sometimes I take a step back and think, oh my gosh, you know, like, just to be where I am right now is just a really exciting place to be, and it's crazy and hectic. And I think if I had the time to sit down and think about it, I've really grown in leaps and bounds in my ability to just kind of manage things. Because in a lot of ways, while I am in an assistant position, I'm also in a manager position, because I have to make sure that everything gets through the process correctly. And if it doesn't, then it's my fault. So, you know, it's a lot. It's more responsibilities keep piling up, and it's you know, just fascinating, but stressful and crazy. Anyway, I'm not answering your question. I'm just telling you a lot about publishing. But,
no, it's interesting. You can keep, but go ahead.
Well, yeah. No, here's the secret to being the next J.K. Rowling. I have no idea. So how do I kind of find a creative outlet right now? Mostly on the weekends, I come home and then sleep in, and then try and force myself to get out of bed. No, it's very creatively draining doing what I do, because you go to work and then there's so much kind of fragmentation of thought involved in answering emails all day. And, you know, I'll get 100 emails a day at least. And to do that, and then also to actually have to edit other people's words. And so to dive into the creative work of actually doing that, even though it's not the same as coming up with, as being a writer. I mean, there's a lot of creative energy that's expended into that. So by the time the weekend comes around, which is really the only time that I have time to write anything on my own, it's just like, you know what? I just want to lie in bed and watch TV. So I haven't done much creative work this year, and that's been frustrating. I mean, I kind of knew coming into it that it was going to eat up a lot of time and effort. I mean, I was told coming into it by my boss that that's kind of the way it's going to be. But we have had an exceptionally busy and prosperous year at this imprint. We've been publishing at about twice the rate that normal imprints publish. Well, twice, yeah, ish. At least one season we published twice the normal the normal rate, which is insane. I mean, it's just insane. So trying to keep my head above water on top of the fact that I'd moved to New York City where I didn't know anybody, I thought, except for one person. And then moving twice in 1 year, because I moved to New York, and then in August I moved across town to a different apartment. And so just like everything that's happening with that, trying to kind of reestablish myself, I'm really hopeful that this year I'll be able to be more creative, to kind of put more out there. Because I mean, it is nice that occasionally authors or people that we run into in a professional setting recognize me from something that I've done, or something I've written at the Standard, which is, it's wonderful for my ego, because I need like regular ego boosts. That's the real reason.
I need constant validation.
Exactly. I'm an affirmation junkie, and I just need people to. It was really nice. We took a phone call with an author once, and we were like, okay, is this guy all right? Is he okay? And like Eric, my boss, introduces me, and Eric's like, well, if you happen to read any really long articles about the Lord of the Rings in the Weekly Standard, and the guy's like, yeah, I remember that, and I'm like, yeah, this author's okay. He's on my good list. So, so anyway, but yeah, what I was building to with that is just that it's nice to have a little bit of a name out there, have a little bit of a reputation out in the world for being my own writer, and instead of just being behind the curtain with everybody else. And not that I don't enjoy like participating in other people's success, but I am also an affirmation junkie. So, it'd be a nice balance. I've written very little over the past year. I wrote a few pieces for Art Digital. I nearly wrote something for a newspaper, but it ended up not working out, and then got a kill fee. But really, just not too much. But I've got a piece actually on Christianity and Doctor Who that I'm hoping to slip into this the next edition of a book on Christianity and Doctor Who.
Well, there you go. See. Sorry, there you go.
Yeah. There's that's really all there is to that. So, hoping to do a little bit more of that this year. Trying to actually set a schedule so that I'm more productive instead of just getting completely exhausted on the weekends or not having any structure.
Yeah, I'm blessed in the respect that my day job doesn't require all that much mental labor, so I can actually like focus my headspace and my creative work outside of what I do full time. So, but yeah, I totally feel that, like, how you could not want to write after everything you do and after all the stuff you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a disciplined writer anyway, and so the fact that even when I get home on the weekends, the stuff that I've been commissioned to do over the last year hasn't really had strict deadlines. So that hasn't been helpful either, because without deadlines, I don't get much done at all. This is why I decided that I couldn't be a writer just out in the wild on my own, because I need structure, and I like being an editor. It does involve creative work, and it involves a degree of leadership and organizational skill, and also criticism. I mean, like, it's kind of a way of being a critic, because you get to pick things apart and put them back together the way you want them to be, and or not. I mean, like, I also like authors to push back. It's never a good sign if they just accept all of your edits uncritically. And if any of my authors are listening, then actually don't listen to that. Just accept everything. But really, it's it's a good idea for authors to have a sense of their own idea. You don't want to just have to hold their hand through the whole project. And in general, I haven't run into that as much. I mean, sometimes I have, and sometimes it's just because they don't really care. And they just won't do it. Not entirely true, but like, there are different reasons why you have to work more on different projects, because sometimes they're just not as experienced a writer, and sometimes they just like don't know where to go next. So it really is. It's a really individual trade, this work, because you have to get to know each author individually and figure out their quirks as a person. It's like being, I'm using another of my boss's phrases. It's like being half engineer, half psychologist, because you're working with people and you're working with structures, and you just really have to kind of be able to step back and get a sense of the big picture, and then think in marketing terms as well. Like, okay, how will yes, this is a beautiful artistic idea, but what is the hook? What is going to make somebody walk into a bookstore and think, this is the book that I want to pay you for?
There you go. Man, it helps to kind of have your niche and find it. I mean, in my experiences, I've started to try to move into freelance writing. Like, finding what you can do and what you like to do helps a lot. Like, I find that when I have an infinite amount of time outside of work to work on writing, especially like a novel or something, it becomes unnecessarily tedious and unstructured to the point where I start hating it. But when I'm working full time and I'm writing essays on the side, that tends to I enjoy the kind of the ability to kind of get closure and finish something relatively quickly. I think Charles Krauthammer talked about that in his first book, where he had the amazing ability to write essays, but when he got to the point where he wanted to write his first book, he turned to another author and was like, "How do you write an entire book?" and I found, and lo and behold, I'm finally gotten to the point where I can actually sell my stuff, and I just sold a piece to Sunny Bunch over at the Rebler a couple weeks ago. So,
oh yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, and for some reason, Sunny Bunch is the one person who will answer my emails. I don't know why, but of all the people,
you would be surprised the amount of people that don't answer emails promptly in the media sphere. Though I would also say that I'm not always one of them. I'm trying to get better about email discipline, but it's just like when there's so many coming at you at once and trying to figure out the best answer, and really I think I just need to set email deadlines of, like, if I don't respond to this email, then so it's
one of the great lessons of my short life has been that if you have even the smallest amount of credentials, important people will likely answer the phone. I mean, I got a producer's license at a public access station not far from me a few years ago, and suddenly I started I wrote all my emails, Tyler Hummel, the television producer, and suddenly people started replying. Like, I started getting like major film critics on the line and authors and stuff like that. But for some reason, the one exception to that ends up being freelance film criticism, because every single person in their right mind is trying to get money doing what I'm trying to do, so no one wants to answer the phone.
Yeah.
It doesn't help. Yeah. It doesn't help that the millennial generation has decided that there are more millennials that want to become film critics than who want to become astronauts. So I've gone into the wrong business.
You just need to put astronaut after your name, and then ask them questions about films.
I don't know. That might be considered stolen valor. I probably wouldn't want to.
I mean, you could be the first astronaut film critic. Like, there's your niche right there.
What's that stupid line from? What's that stupid line from? That's the bad asteroid movie from the 90s. It's easier to turn an engineer into an astronaut than to turn an astronaut into an engineer, or something like that. But just say it with film critics.
Yeah, it would have been so much more interesting Ad Astra if Brad Pitt had started a film podcast halfway through, and then just started watching fatherhood movies and talking about so this is, and that would explain why he kept doing voiceovers that were really cringy in that movie. It's his podcast. He's talking about his feelings. He's broadcasting his podcast back to Earth. Pod Astra.
Oh, picture this. Woody Allen's next film. He's playing his character from Play It Again, Sam, except he has to become the astronaut from Armageddon.
I just really want alternate versions of all the classic films with one character who's doing a podcast about it the whole time. I mean, it would really work with classic stories where there's this one narrator character. So it would be like Great Gatsby is all told through Nick's podcast.
Oh my
Like, so on this
gosh.
episode, you know, we we go to Gatsby's house again.
I mean, Apocalypse
yeah.
Now would become like a masterpiece.
Yeah, there we go. Everybody would have to tune into the Apocalypse Now podcast every week and find out what's happened next.
Oh gosh, this is either the best idea or the worst idea, and we may have just ended culture single-handedly. So,
Well, that's my goal right there. You know, I feel like I'm accomplishing things. Just burning it all down. I'm the Donald Trump of culture.
oh my. Speaking of the Donald Trump of culture, I did want to bring up topic-wise the Oscar nominations, which just released yesterday. We're recording on Tuesday. And Joker won 11 nominations, and Twitter is not happy about this. So... Did you respond? I didn't hear you.
I think you cut out there. No, you cut out just for a second.
Yeah, you cut out too. But yeah, the Joker is slated to win Best Picture. Thoughts?
I hope it does not win Best Picture. I say this as as someone who has not seen it, but of course already has an opinion about it. This is why I'm such a good critic. Is I've formed my opinion entirely from Twitter, but the entire idea of the film, I've watched bits and pieces of it, and it you know, it seems like it's kind of an interesting pastiche, but like it's such a gimmick type of a movie. Plus, I know the main twist in it, and the twist seems like it just sort of undermines the whole thing because it wants to make the whole thing into mythology. And I mean, involving a certain character's parents and yada, yada, yada. It just like, for a story that's wanting to do something bold and interesting and out in its own universe, the fact that it kind of keeps gravitating back to the same basic stories and not doing anything terribly interesting with them. It's just kind of doing like a sort of typical plot twist. It seems a little bit like Shrinking World syndrome, but also doesn't seem like it's as bold as everybody says it is. I think style may be confusing people with people may be confusing style with substance here. But again, it's something that I haven't seen it, and so I shouldn't really be going on about it like that. But it's my impression of it, and I kind of all of the sort of serious superhero films of the last few years that haven't really impressed me all that much. Even Logan, which was the only one that like people genuinely seemed to think was an artsy movie, but I didn't think it was that artsy. I mean, it hit a lot odd under its style, and I think that may be the same case here. But ultimately, the reason it needs to lose is just that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was nominated. So
I was gonna say that there are a handful of picks I would want to win. I'm gonna go ahead and just disqualify my own opinion from the conversation and say I do not care who wins the Oscars at all. I think I'm one of those people that thinks the Oscars just doesn't represent anything beyond just having won an Oscar. I mean, I don't know if that's a controversial
I haven't
take.
really watched the Oscars in years, so like this is entirely me just like screaming into the void as if any of this matters. Like I really don't care all that much about the Oscars, and but I do think that it would be good if something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or The Irishman were recognized, just because they're serious. Like they are. They're serious films in an unserious age, and like I don't know. Again, like I'm picking on Joker just because I haven't seen it. Maybe it is a serious movie, but it's about a comic book character, and I am channeling my inner Martin Scorsese right now, and I'm just gonna go after comic book characters, and I enjoy comic book movies, but they're just it's an unserious age that elevates that to the top of its.
I mean, the part of me that the part of me that despises the Oscars kind of wants Joker to win in the same way that I wanted Green Book to win, just because I knew it would make all of the worst people really, really, really mad. And I mean, at this point, is there any more of a like indication that the Oscars are culturally irrelevant than if the Joker won Best Picture? I mean, I like the film. It's fine, but it's very adolescent compared to a lot of other movies of its type. So
What beat Dunkirk? Was it The Shape of Water? Like,
yes.
I mean, yeah, which I also haven't seen and I've prejudged. But
I mean, credit where it's due. Shape of Water was at least a well done movie by an established director who'd probably deserved an Oscar earlier in his career. But it's also
I could see that. Like,
it's also a horrifically degenerate movie about bestiality. So I don't understand how it won. But
Del Toro is just I don't understand the appeal. I've tried, but every time I watch one of his movies, I realize I'm a wimp, and that the gore in it never really seems to add to the story to me. It just seems like it's just like, for instance, in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, while the gore was a little bit excessive, it was
quote unquote.
It was. Yeah, it was certainly, it was driven by the story. Like, I could see why it was there. I could see what was happening. Like, it was all kind of driven by I could see what Tarantino was doing with it. It wasn't just like, oh, let's just have a really shocking scene here just so that you'll not be able to get that out of your head for 2 weeks. Del Toro. Anyway, I'm very bitter about watching Pan's Labyrinth and not forgetting certain images.
Yeah, I see. I can kind of figure out which one you're going at, but yeah, I mean, I like Del Toro, but he has a very strange philosophy, and a lot of movies are very uneven either way. So, but in regards to this year's Oscars, I mean, I can't tell you what I necessarily want to win purely. I mean, a handful of movies I think should have been nominated weren't. For whatever reason, A Hidden Life didn't get nominated. And I really thought that should have, because it's one of the best films I've seen in years. At least in regards to the things I'm personally interested in, because I'm one of those people that thinks Silence is the greatest thing Martin Scorsese's ever directed. But
well, yeah, then you're definitely in the target audience there. I liked A Hidden Life. I think the reason it wasn't nominated was probably just how narrowly it was seen, really. I mean, the thing about Terrence Malick is that, obviously not the world's most commercial director, but A Tree of Life really had a much broader commercial audience than anybody expected, and he hasn't achieved anything like that since. I think this is the most commercial film he's done in a long time, maybe ever. I mean, it's easy to understand. There aren't random dinosaurs that turn up, though I kind of wish there were. I think that could have really spiced up the third act. But dinosaurs, and then one of the characters starts a podcast. But I'm sorry, this is terrible.
You're gonna kill me. I'm already dying of flu, and you're gonna kill me. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just all podcast jokes from here on out. Yeah, I did like it. I thought I did think it was a little bit long, which was weird, because I really like The New World. It's my favorite Terrence Malick film, and it's definitely longer and more rambly. This one felt was a little bit straightforward to me, but I want to see it again, because I think my expectations were somewhat shaping my experience of the film, because I was hoping for it to be a little bit more twisty, I guess, because I already knew the story, and so I was just like, oh, okay, they're just telling it really simply then. Malick is so known for jumping back and forth in time and doing all of these kind of crazy, like, bits and pieces all over the place, and this was sort of like that, but it was honestly a pretty linear storyline, and so I was sort of like trying to figure out, okay, what's the catch here? It's like, nope, he's like, I'm just doing something really straightforward. But the other thing, and this is not entirely his fault. I mean, so James Newton Howard did the score for The New World, and it was such a good score. it really had a lot of depth, and there was just all throughout the film bits and pieces that you remembered. This one, I thought the score was very straightforward, and there just wasn't a lot of variety to it. I think James Horner did this one, but he tends to repeat himself a little bit, and this one just kind of had this one little hook that got repeated a lot in the movie. So, if there was one thing that I would change about it is to not only just maybe tighten it up just a little bit, though that I think I would probably not mind as much on a second viewing, but I would like a score that was a little bit more varied.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of moments where it was kind of, it seemed like it was going for like 2001-y.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hear the giant operatic organ music, and I guess like, yeah, I know where this is going, but I mean, I don't know. I think that movie had best picture material, especially in a year like this where most of the movies that were interesting kind of came out towards the end. So I mean, I'm surprised. I'm surprised it didn't either way.
It could have been a contender, definitely.
I just pull up the list on my phone. I'm surprised that Jojo Rabbit got in and that didn't.
Yeah, that does seem strange, and it does. Yeah, I could see that, and I think it was probably just because it had a broader release, and they didn't feel right elevating something that they didn't feel like, or maybe most of them hadn't seen.
I guess. I mean, I know that with the Oscar committee, they get copies of the movie from the studio, so it's not like I don't think that makes a difference in terms of, unless the studio wasn't pushing for an Oscar, which would be interesting. But I mean, otherwise, I'm looking at the list, and it looks pretty straightforward for stuff that came out towards the end of the year. I mean, obviously, like Ford v Ferrari and Little Women are kind of obvious picks. But yeah, I mean,
and like Little Women and A Hidden Life came out before Little Women, so it's not like they didn't have time to catch all the late ones.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at this list, I would say that the immediate one is probably that The Irishman is probably the one that has the best chance of winning, if I had to put money on it.
Mm.
I mean, if trying to guess the Oscar committee's whims is like trying to, I don't even know. There's no real good gauge of it, just other than that they're horribly disconnected from any sort of reality. So.
Oh, I mean, I think that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has a pretty good chance, just because of the old, well-worn reason of being a film about Hollywood, and Hollywood loves films about Hollywood.
Yeah, but there's also the Tarantino factor, and I think that that's gonna turn a lot of the voters off. Same with Parasite. Parasite's a little too not Hollywoody. I mean, it's a very good movie, but it's also very not the kind of movie I would expect to win, unless it was something like Moonlight, where they clearly voted for it out of guilt. But
yeah, no, I mean, I think that with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it is. I mean, there is the Tarantino factor, especially at the end, but so much of it is obviously his not very thinly veiled pay-in to just Hollywood itself, to cinema, to screen stars, to a certain cinematic, well, I was gonna say way of life, but that's not what I mean. It's just the movie star life of the 50s, and so there's all this nostalgia tied up in it. And when you have like older voters in the Academy now, probably, I think that would really likely appeal to them. I mean, these are the same people, more or less, that voted The Artist in. That's the sort of thing I think that just really would appeal to an Oscar voter.
Yeah, I considered trying to use the Ben Shapiro formulation of what one is the most political film, and even that doesn't feel like it's gonna be easy to pick this year, because it's maybe Little Women wins because of the political ideology of it, but I don't even know if that works, because there really isn't a front runner of woke this year.
Yeah, no, I mean, Parasite maybe, but I'm there isn't like this. Yeah, there isn't an obvious choice there.
Like if Black Klansman came out this year as opposed to last year, I would say that would probably has like the topicality factor to push it into like the best picture winner, but there's really nothing here that's like overt. It's all pretty standard Oscar stuff. Like maybe there's maybe Ford v Ferrari wins just because it's kind of got the emotional appeal to so many people.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm really looking forward to is Ricky Gervais hosting the Oscars.
Oh my gosh! I didn't they just say that they're not going to have anyone host this year or something crazy like that?
Yeah, they're not going to have anybody host. Though I think it was Stephen Greydonis who made the suggestion, which I am now never going to forget, that they just need to have the Muppets host it. I mean, that's the obvious choice here. That would make it fantastic.
I saw along those lines that they should have Bibu Frick from The Rise of Skywalker host it, the little tiny alien that can't speak English.
I would be on board with that. It was the only good character in that movie. Well, at least good new character, but maybe good character.
Yeah,
I think we need to have like an inverted Oscars just for movies that are so bad, and that one would probably win in Worst Picture.
Well, that's the Razzies, so.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know who wins the Razzies anymore. I think I stopped paying attention after like Twilight 4.
Well, to be fair, I think with this, what would really need to be necessary for movies like Rise of Skywalker and Endgame is most mediocre movies of the year.
Oh
they're
gosh.
Just like, they are so basic. I mean, they're not like actively bad. They're not like The Room, which is just like, oh, this is interesting in a like bad in an interesting way. It's just like every beat you can kind of feel coming, and they're not constructed well, and they don't care, and they don't expect an audience to tell the difference. It's just like really, really condescending.
I'm glad we're on the same page about Endgame, because I've been taking the opposite stance from a lot of people who have been saying it's their favorite movie this year, and I think when I reviewed it for Geeks Under Grace, I said it was like 7 out of 10, and like, yeah, there's lots of nice stuff in it, and it's fun, and the final battle's fun, but
well,
is that it?
You have a better rating of it than I would. I mean, the thing about it is it's barely a movie. It's the way that it's constructed is just all about kind of going from one dopamine hit to another as you make references that the audience will get, and then just be happy about, like, from one joke to another, or from one comic book reference to another, or from one callback to another. But there's nothing resembling actual growth or actual like serious change. It's just, and I wrote a piece about this for Arc Digital, which is about how it's just the illusion of change. It's, as Stan Lee called it, there's this sense that the characters have actually moved from point A to point B, but they've only really moved in space, and they've not actually moved in character. They've not changed or developed in any way, really. The only way that Marvel knows how to end things is by taking things back to the beginning, and so by callbacks and by, quite literally in this movie, time travel, because they don't know how to end something. They're like, let's just go back to the beginning and rehash everything. And so they, instead of recognizing, okay, Tony Stark is fundamentally different from the sort of selfish and feet of clay character that he originally was, ergo, his ending doesn't need to be about redemption because he's not that guy anymore. They're like, oh, he's still that guy, let's give him a redemptive ending. And so instead of recognizing, okay, Steve Rogers isn't the same guy who went into the ice anymore, he's somebody who's fundamentally different, and his dream, like his destiny now isn't about being the guy who has a normal family. It's about being the loner who gave up all of that. Like, both of those characters have kind of reversed their original trajectory because of the things that happened to them. But in the last movie, they're just like, well, actually, let's just give them the ending that you could have predicted from the first movie that featured them.
Well, there you go. I mean, my 7 out of 10 is mostly just because I found it to be purely placative. I mean, it landed the burning wreckage that was the Marvel Cinematic Universe with minimum casualties. So, but
yeah, if anything, I would say that like Rise of Skywalker played it very, very safe.
Well, I would say, in some ways, I would say Rise of Skywalker handled its characters, at least its most important characters' story arcs, thematically appropriate to the end as it was intended. At least with Endgame, I would dare to say that I would find the way it resolved some of the characters that aren't coming back kind of abusively. Like, I kind of hate the idea that Captain America, the character who was established as the selfless person in the world, ends his entire story arc by doing something that's entirely selfish, and I don't think that's earned within the story.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And it's especially if, like, you know, and I did watch the Agent Carter series, which was kind of fine. But like it felt like that completely nixed all of her character development too, and it created weird retconning problems of just like, wait, so if Peggy was married to Steve the whole time, was that in an alternate? I mean, like, you don't want your audience to be sitting in the last frame thinking about like that sort of thing of just like, wait, how does that? Wait, huh? Instead of like, this is something that's been built up to of a character reuniting with someone that it somehow furthers their character development to be with. Instead, it just kind of returns Cap to the beginning. I mean, again, it's just a return to the status quo because they don't know what to do, and they don't have the guts to actually change the characters. And it's a shame because like this was the one movie where you could really do that. Like, I mean, this was the movie where they're not going to come back. I mean, like, so you really should be able to swing for the fences with this one, and they don't, which is a shame. I mean, with Infinity War, like, for all of my critiques of that, because I think that similarly, it's just kind of about characters moving from A to B instead of a story being told that has, like, careful foreshadowing and all of that stuff. Like, it does genuinely swing for the fences with that last scene. I mean, it's yes and no. I mean, it is kind of, it's like as far as they're going to go in a big corporate thing where like they crumble into dust and you know they're not really gone. Like, so it didn't actually work for me the first time, but it is, it's a pretty bold decision to end a movie with the bad guy triumphant, and then it just like that's the last shot of the movie. It's like, you know, that's pretty cool. But with this one, it's really they just kind of drag it back over the finish line. That's, you can kind of, it feels creatively exhausted, and both of the movies I look at as more logistical triumphs than creative triumphs, because you're trying to balance dozens and dozens of plates at one time, and so it feels a little bit churlish to criticize a man who walks across the street balancing 50 plates without dropping any of them. But like, if the guy was supposed to dance across the street and you're just like, well, you didn't do that. I mean, like, that wasn't nobody needs to have every single MCU character in one movie if you can't tell a good movie while you're doing it. It's just a logistical thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna creatively hurt them going forward, but for whatever reason, almost everyone I've talked to in my kind of circles they seem to be not really on the same page as that. I've seen so many like lists from my people I write with constantly who put Infinity War and Endgame on their best movies of the decade list, or a couple people who put Endgame on their best movies of the year list for this year, and I'm just sitting here like, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't know what your priorities are going into this movie and what you want out of it. But just I'm not a anti-comic book snob. I've been on this train since back when Iron Man came out, and I don't necessarily know what everyone else wants out of this. Like, at the very least,
I mean,
for something...
for the benefit of listeners, you've got like three, I think, superhero posters hanging behind you right now.
Oh yeah, I've got the Marvel Secret Wars poster behind me, and then Guardians of the Galaxy 2 on the other side. And then for good measure, there's a signed Manhattan poster from Woody Allen right above it. So.
And then you've got the Third Man, who's one of the lesser known superheroes.
Yeah, we all know that Woody Allen is the least popular of all superheroes. So. But.
Well, I mean the Third Man with Orson Welles.
Well, yeah.
Orson Welles would have made a great villain,
yeah.
like in a Marvel movie. I once created a a trailer featuring, you know how like somebody recast all of the Avengers as if it was made in the 1980s or the 70s, I can't remember which. Anyway, I did that if it was like the 40s or 50s. And so I cast Orson Welles as Ultron.
Oh
Um,
man.
and, and Cary Grant as Tony Stark, Gary Cooper as Captain America. Gosh, Bucky Rooney was Spider-Man because there weren't really any teen stars at the time, but he sort of fit. I think my favorite casting of the whole thing was that as the Incredible Hulk, I had Jimmy Stewart.
Bestow my beating
anyway,
heart.
It's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. You should all look it up. I'm just self-promoting all the time tonight. So here we go.
There you go.
I'm proud of it. It's probably the best thing I've edited.
I don't know. I mean, I'm scared of that the technology they use to bring back Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One is going to become disabused, and we're going to wind up with every celebrity is going to be reenacted with the CGI in the future. And
okay, look, just because I'm going to turn Cary Grant into the next Iron Man doesn't mean that I'm going to misuse this power. Ha 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 ha. Evil laugh. Yeah, well, no, I'm actually on board with you there. There's a great New Atlantis piece about the use of CGI technology to create Tarkin and any number of people, and just kind of like the ethics behind all that. It's really fantastic. So, yes, it's wrong. People shouldn't do it. Okay, but making Avengers trailers with long dead stars, that's fine.
That's fair. At least that's fan fiction-y, and like there's some passion behind it as opposed to just recreating a dead man.
That's my one exception to this rule, and it's entirely carved up for me.
Fan fiction.
Look, so my thing is that if it's good, then it's not fan fiction, it's pastiche, which sounds French and also not like fan fiction. So that's why this isn't fan fiction. It's pastiche.
It is degenerate, and I hate it. No.
This is like the difference between good Sherlock Holmes stories, not by Arthur Conan Doyle, and bad ones. It's just like, oh, well, this is fan fiction, and this is pastiche. So. As
someone who's read at least half a dozen of the Star Wars Expanded Universe novels, I can confirm that it does no good for anyone. So, even if it's sold for money, it is not good for anyone.
Oh, gosh. Well, see, this is why I would, and it is somewhat of an indefinite category in my head, but I qualify J.J. Abrams' Star Wars as fan fiction just because every plot point almost is shaped around wanting to please the fans. And then Rian Johnson, I would say, is more like pastiche in that it sort of lives in the same universe, but it's not trying to like get a react. I mean, actually, I would say that it's almost anti-fan fiction, and that's kind of his problem. Is that The Last Jedi isn't so much just telling a story in the same universe. It's like trying to tell a story that's the opposite of other stories. And so because it sort of is constantly defining itself by not being a thing, never quite discovers what it is itself. But that's Disney Star Wars has its own tangle of backs and forths and problems, and everybody just needs to go watch everything that Dave Filoni is involved in instead.
At some point, I'm going to write an extended article on the identity crisis that's happening inside Star Wars, because obviously I don't. The poster behind me should show you my opinion on the state of Star Wars. So I have some contrarian opinions on it, but like when it comes to the new stuff, I think that there's a lot of a lack of desire to kind of engage with what the actual story needs to be told as a whole. Like, I think if Rise of Skywalker had been more of a story about characters building their own identity in the absence of having their previous identities destroyed, I think it would have kind of cushioned the blow of the trilogy a lot more and made it a lot more less frustrating in retrospect. And because I think that there's a lot of people that are that that still really like The Force Awakens, who hate The Last Jedi, who would have been a lot happier had this last one actually kind of landed, which it's surprising just to the degree that it doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really does try to keep everyone in that, like, it wants Rey to be part of the bigger universe, but it also wants her to build her own identity, and the way that it goes about that is just really dumb. I mean, I'm just like, I see what you're trying to do with this, and like it works in a really dumb way. I mean, it's just like it's just so kind of brutally hacking away at story threads to make them fit into something that sort of makes everything work instead of organically growing out of what's come before. It's just like, okay, so we want this and we don't want that. We want Rey to be part of the story, so she's going to be descended from this character. I mean, I assume that spoilers have to be on the table.
It's been a month. Right? It's been a month. Go ahead.
I think so. I mean, like, it's all over the internet, and nobody also, like, as opposed to Endgame, nobody really seems to care about Rise of Skywalker spoilers, which is another strange thing.
Well, the problem was that for the weeks leading up to it, there were so many leaks going on that it was getting pretty clear that a lot of people knew what a lot of those spoilers were going into it.
That's true, but also, like, Palpatine's voice was in the trailers. I mean, like, it was pretty obvious. But yeah, to like make Rey, okay, I'll just go for it. Rey, make Rey a Palpatine instead of a nobody, and like that sort of solved the problem of her not being anybody, even though I'm not sure it was a problem. But then at the same time, they want her to be able to define herself against that, even though it doesn't really become a struggle for her. And so it's just like, it doesn't push her character in any interesting directions. It solves her existential angst by letting her parents be good people. Okay, I don't have to worry about that. And then she's like, well, now I have to go kill Palpatine. Instead of just like, oh my gosh, I'm related to a mass murderer, let me work this out. It's just like, well, no, I'm just going to go kill him. And like, he does try and tempt her and everything, but then she kills him. I mean, it's like, there's no real internal conflict for any of the characters created by the plot points that they use, and so it's just executed in a dumb and uninteresting way.
But the weird thing is that, like, you can see the roots of like all these ideas that could have grown into more interesting stories and dilemmas in the film as it's presented. Like, there are at least 5 times in the movie where a character dies as a result of as the consequence of a character's actions, and it could have brought to an interesting moral dilemma where a character has to reflect on what happened and move forward and consider what their own power is and struggle with their identity and who they are. And then the character just comes back to life like 5 minutes after that. And
yeah, and like it was the first time it happened, I was a little bit like, wow, that was really kind of a gutsy move. But then I thought to myself, they probably aren't going to do it that way, because I can't see them like killing off a legacy character off screen and then doing. And so I thought, I'm going to kind of hold back my emotional response here, because I don't think this is true. And sure enough, like a few minutes later, it was revealed, and it wasn't even concealed from the audience. Like, the audience knew about it well before the characters did, so that we didn't actually have to deal with that uncertainty. And then it just kept happening. Like, every single time that a character seemed irrevocably dead or gone, it was just like, oh, well, no, actually, we're going to take the kind of easier route out. And so it's just kind of this bait and switch all throughout the movie. And it's difficult to know what you're supposed to be feeling at any point, and to know, like, and for anything to feel significant, because you know it can just be swept out from under you a few minutes later. So it was just, it felt non-committal and kind of cheap.
But the one time I think the movie actually did kind of come to terms with the character's internal reaction was when Rey flies back to Luke Skywalker's island and decides that she's going to reenact the plot of The Last Jedi all by herself, and then Luke Skywalker says, I just did that, don't do that. if it weren't for the fact that that scene plays out in all of 2 minutes, that could have been the most interesting plot point of the entire movie.
Yeah, though, like my sister and I have been replotting the thing because she really hated the movie and immediately like messaged me to tell me as she came out of the theater. She's like, I wasn't expecting it to be that dumb, but she's a huge Star Wars nerd, so we've been coming up with alternative ways that the story could have gone. There's going to be so much pastiche coming out of this anyway. But like just there could have been really interesting ways to use legacy characters instead of the ways that they did. I mean, some of it was fine, but it would have really been interesting to see Luke and Kylo continue to interact, because he did say, "See you around, kid," at the end of The Last Jedi, and because he presented Kylo much more of a challenge than he did Rey, because we've seen what those two characters do together the whole time through. Seeing them again together doesn't really reveal anything for either one of them. But seeing Kylo interact with Luke would have been, I think, really interesting, because they did have this history, and because they had a lot to work out even at the end of the last movie. Another interesting character that it would have been interesting to see Kylo interact with, and this may be controversial, but is Anakin. I mean, that seems to me like the obvious shock reveal is that you have, and I think you've got to have Hayden Christensen if you're going to do this, but like, you know, give him some acting lessons, get him out there with some good lines, maybe like do a CGI version if that doesn't work. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm picking on the poor guy.
No, I agree, bring him back, but
I think it would have been a really interesting way to incorporate both the prequel trilogy and also to challenge Kylo in a new way.
Well, I think, to me, the biggest problem with the sequel trilogy is that it's so pathologically unwilling to engage with anything from the prequels that it won't take any of their strengths. And as a result, it just creates this really myopic vision of Star Wars that just draws upon the original trilogy and nothing else. Like, Star Wars is at its best when it's drawing upon this vast, like, pastiche, word of the day, pastiche of influences from, like, Kurosawa to Sergio Leone to John Ford. When it has a huge breadth of material to it, Star Wars it becomes deeper and more interesting visually. But the new sequel trilogy, it only borrows from Star Wars, and the only times it doesn't do that are when it goes out of its way to, like, flip off the prequels. Like, the only reason they show you Hosnian Prime getting destroyed in Force Awakens is just to be like, yep, we blew up the politics planet. That's not going to have any role here. And in practice, it just means that there's not going to be any world building to this trilogy because world building is boring.
Yeah, and it's frustrating because, you know, I grew up with the prequel trilogy, so I guess I'm kind of part of that generation. It does feel like there's sort of a generational fondness for it for certain people, but I just remember so fondly the vastness of the world that it put in front of audiences. I mean, it really did feel like it was spilling off of the edges of the screen, and there was, if the characters just walked off camera, they would walk into a fully realized world in a way that never seemed true of the Disney trilogy, which seemed kind of to turn in on itself as very often. The middle of the three is better about that, but it too was a story that was smaller in scale than you would have expected. I mean, it ended up being about very kind of small concerns in a lot of ways. I mean, that worked very well for a personal storyline like Luke and Kylo and Rey, and which was my favorite part of that movie. But on the other hand, you had basically just a kind of slow speed chase in space with a bunch of characters that, like, yeah, it was strange. You never quite knew how big the bad guys' army was and the good guys, and then, like, all of a sudden everything was turned around. It was just there's no sense of scope, and there's no sense of, like, reliable world building outside of what is immediately in front of us, it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I like The Last Jedi, so I kind of distance myself, or not. That's not the right way to say that. I disagree with a lot of people in our circles that are very mad at that movie, but
Yeah,
obviously,
I'm in the weird position of like both liking and disliking it. I think that it's by far the best of the sequel trilogy, while also being a bad movie for certain reasons. And partly it might just be that I think of it as a bad Star Wars movie, but a good movie in other ways. That's almost kind of the way you have to think about it, because so much of this is informed by what we think Star Wars is or should be.
I don't know. I wouldn't even call it a. I wouldn't call it a bad Star Wars movie and a good movie. I'd say it's almost an anti-Star Wars movie. Just it's kind of like a theme. It's a thematic deconstruction of Star Wars in almost like in the Game of Thrones sense, where it's deconstructing something that's very specific and tangible, and just kind of picking it apart and seeing what it's made, and like the way George R.R. Martin does to Lord of the Rings, where it's trying to pick it apart. Although I do think the ending is more affirming than I think most people give it credit for. Because at the very
Yeah, I think so too. I definitely think that it's a deconstruction. I mean, I wrote a piece about kind of like The Last Jedi, the deconstruction of myth, but I think that probably because of the studio, it ends up not sticking to its guns, and so it ends up just kind of being drawn back to the status quo instead of being like, okay, so we've deconstructed these things. Here's what we have left. Instead, it's just like, well, actually, these things are still what we're going to stick with at the end. And so it's positive in a certain way, but it doesn't really justify why it's just going back to the things that it deconstructed. While I think it could have.
But it doesn't land, I think, because of the way the third film ultimately resolves. I mean, I think if the third film had worked, you would have had a structure of a trilogy where it's the first film is about characters coming into contact with legends, a second film about deconstructing the legend, and a third film about building new legends and building a new identity in the absence of them. But then they messed up.
I think that could have worked.
Then they messed up.
Part of the thing was that everybody watching The Last Jedi was thinking, oh man, the next movie is going to be directed by J.J. Abrams.
Yeah, and I think that culture is finally coming to the conclusion that J.J. Abrams is not a good director after a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, the real conclusion here is that everybody just needs to go watch The Mandalorian, watch The Clone Wars, watch Star Wars Rebels, and yeah, I mean, like that's where the real stuff is happening right now, man.
I'm way more forgiving of Disney Star Wars than most people, and I'm inclined to agree. Like Dave Filoni Star Wars it's something else.
Yeah, I mean, like for all the fact that it can sometimes be a little childish and simple, he is trying new things, and he's had the sort of time to mature as a storyteller, and he's also, what I really like about him is that he's not cynical. He's not interested in deconstructing anything, but he's also not interested in just creating things that are going to pat fans on the head and just make you feel warm and rosy about things that have come before. Like he's working with all of the same colors on the same palette. He's not adding any bright new shades, but he is also like he's not just going to give you the same arrangement of colors. He's trying interesting, if slight, new angles on things. That's kind of what The Mandalorian seemed like to me, is that it doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it just kind of takes the things that you know and then gives a slight new spin to them without making it just really all about fan satisfaction. Like they're interested in telling a new story, and they do it in like organic ways that don't repeat the same archetypes. Like it's not a huge good versus evil, good guys versus the Empire type story. It's much more of a loner Western type thing, The Mandalorian. So it's a new type of story, even though it uses a lot of the same things that show up in like the Sandmen and all that stuff. but it just seems to be more intelligent about the way that it references those things.
Yeah, I've been mulling a lot on Dave Filoni's style because I've been watching Clone Wars and Rebels since I got Disney Plus because I am a corporate shill. But I mean, the thing that kind of fascinates me about his writing style is that there's an underlying subtext to his work in all three shows that at the end of the day, all these characters are not in the main saga films. And it adds this very strange kind of bittersweet subtext to it that these characters are in some way are either doomed to die or doomed to irrelevancy. Like, most of the Clone Wars characters either wind up dead or they wind up serving the Empire. Most of the Rebels characters, well, most of the Rebels characters have been retroactively rewritten into original canon, which I don't like. But I think at its best, the stories kind of have to grapple with the fact that these characters are all good people that are ultimately kind of marching towards a kind of very personal or individual destruction. And when they don't wrestle with that, that's when the stories don't work. Like, I don't like the idea that Ahsoka Tano just survived the Galactic Civil War and managed to survive all the way up to the Battle of Endor, and then hasn't been seen since she went to fly off and find Ezra. I mean, I don't like that ending. But
yeah, okay. Like I just enjoy Ahsoka coming back, but I think you're probably right. Is that it does become a little bit fan servicey when it's just like, oh, and now she didn't survive. She survived again.
She should have freaking died when she fought Darth Vader, because that's when her story ended. But then they introduced time travel into Star Wars just so they can rescue her. Okay.
Yeah, that was a little. With every, if Dave Filoni is kind of the new George Lucas, then he's got to have his own set of flaws, and I think that's probably one of them, is that he can't kill his darlings. I understand my sister had mentioned that George Lucas, when he was plotting out the Clone Wars or talking to Filoni about it, that he's like, oh, you've got to kill Ahsoka, and Filoni's like, ah.
I think keeping Ahsoka alive is his revenge against Lucas for Lucas killing Plo Koon. Like, have you heard that Filoni is the biggest Plo Koon fan on the planet?
I haven't, and I'm enjoying this.
Look up his Wikipedia article after this. Just look up Dave Filoni on Wikipedia. There's like 2 paragraphs on how much he loves Plo Koon and how devastated he was watching Revenge of the Sith the first time.
That is really funny and really nerdy and makes me like him.
Yeah, apparently he's got like sculptures of Plo Koon in his office at Lucasfilm. It's so weird. I can get like
imagining looking at like Plo Koon's helmet and saying, "I will finish what you started."
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to Filoni, I hope he does better and ends up getting more influence over Disney, because that guy gets stuff about Star Wars that no one else gets. The guy made an episode of The Mandalorian about the Jawas, and it's the best freaking thing in that show. I don't know how a person does this successfully.
Yeah, he had to be just so happy to be working on The Mandalorian, seeing so many of the things that he did with the Clone Wars coming in like live action. Well, I mean, ish, but just that had to be as a fan, which he obviously is. That had to be a huge moment for him.
Yeah, I'm hoping they keep the same creative team going into the next few seasons, because I'm afraid The Mandalorian has the potential to completely tip into complete fan service nonsense. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Like, especially with the final shot of the season being like, yeah, we're bringing back all the Mandalorian stuff from the Clone Wars. I'm like,
yeah. But it was funny. My sister recognized Jon Favreau's voice in one of the Mandalorians. She's watched the Clone Wars so often. They just grew up on it, her and my brother, and she was like, I bet he's related to Pre Vizsla because that's who he played in the Clone Wars. And sure enough, I looked it up on IMDb, and I'm like, that's amazing that you can actually recognize that voice. That's a new level of nerdery. But yeah, normally it was just like really deep cut references like that of just like, oh, Jon Favreau was someone who's related to his character from the Clone Wars. But yeah, I could see it becoming a crutch and it hasn't yet, so I'm hopeful for it going forward, but they also haven't really tried anything super ambitious plot-wise. I mean, it's really been a fairly straightforward plot. So once they like start tangling up with mythology or anything going forward, I think that could be perilous waters. But the main thing that I like about it is just the simplicity of its moral vision. That it doesn't feel like it needs to be angsty or edgy. That the Mandalorian is a good guy. Like he's just a straight up like white hat cowboy. I mean, like they don't have him like killing somebody who's trying to like he's interrogating or something. Like I think they did that in Rogue One.
Well,
It's just
he does drag a man through a door that's closing and cut him in half, but that's the most violent thing we've seen him do so far. So
yeah, and also like that was self-defense, etc. I mean, who amongst us has not done such a thing?
yeah, I've definitely bifurcated as pedestrian and self-defense. Yeah, that's happens all the freaking time. But yeah, Star Wars is. I'm right now. I'm talking with my boss about having them send me down to do some work with corporate in Orlando, and I'm very strategically planning my trip to coincide with the day at Galaxy's Edge. So what can I say? I am complete chill out at the end of the day. I will put just about anything Star Wars related into my veins directly, like Barney, and not complain very much. So.
Oh yeah, just like all of my favorite things that I'm gonna see no matter what. I love to complain about.
Well, yeah. I don't get the sense that most people are happy about most Star Wars things anymore. So I want to try to put happy Star Wars content on the internet when I can.
Oh yeah, well I appreciate that. It's Star Wars fans can seem like the only thing that they enjoy doing is complaining about stuff, and that I don't want to be that sort of fan. Is that I do genuinely, I've enjoyed the sequel trilogy for what it was. I don't think it was terribly good, but I think that it's one of those last cultural tentpoles, and I think it's a shame that it seems to kind of be fading from being that.
Well, the funny thing was, I just watched a couple weeks ago. I went back and watched The People versus George Lucas, which I had not watched since the sequel trilogy started. And I will tell you, watching that after everything we've seen with the sequel trilogy, it completely colors it in a way you would not expect. Like, I'm assuming you've seen it at some point, because it was.
I haven't, but my feelings about George Lucas have changed so dramatically after the sequel trilogy. It's really incredible. So I expect that's kind of part of what you're talking about.
Not necessarily towards Lucas. I feel more bad for him than I did, but I still think my opinions on his writing and quality are relatively the same as what they were, although I've definitely gotten more nuanced about it. I mean, like, classic Star Wars is obviously kind of a hodgepodge of influences in terms of who was in the editing bay and who was making decisions, because he had his wife Marcia Lucas editing, John Williams, Ben Burtt, and the entire team at Industrial Light and Magic, and they could tell him no. They could say at any point in the process, this thing is not working, it needs to change, and he would take that as a serious criticism. And by the time of the prequels, he stopped taking the word no from anyone. And it just became all of his vision. His rough draft scripts ran without any sort of people giving him any criticism for what should or should not be in those scripts. And they just shot it as was, and they ended up on screen as he fully intended them without any second thought. And we saw what it's like to have a rough draft script without second guessing put on screen 3 times.
Yeah. I think those are fair criticisms.
But I mean, but the alternative is the sequel trilogy, where you take everything that didn't work about the prequels, sand it out forcefully, and then direct that as like a series of action movies without the substance that goes behind it. I mean, there's attempts to try to explore what Star Wars is in the new trilogy. These are kind of movies about mythology and identity and forming your own beliefs and ideologies in the absence of the ones that failed before you. But almost all of that came out of the Last Jedi. Most of those themes aren't present in Force Awakens or Rise of Skywalker in any serious degree. So it ends up being, you get a trilogy that's almost defined by its desire to tie its hands behind its back and just try to make people happy based on this very, very narrow vision of what the fans are from about a decade ago.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like the J.J. Abrams movies are almost entirely spiritually incurious, in that the Force is a plot device and nothing more. And I mean, it serves the same purpose as magic, and there's no real sense that there's character development tied to it. It's just a power that the characters have, as opposed to The Last Jedi, which is no less atheistic in a way.
Oh, it's very atheistic in as
well,
its
yeah.
themes.
In that, I think that J.J. Abrams' Star Wars, it's all about, like, I'm trying to find the right religious metaphor for it. Maybe it's prosperity gospel Star Wars. No, that's wrong. I mean, it is. It's just like the Force turns up when you need it to, but it's really just not the Force anymore. It's not personalized. I mean, well, the Force was never really personalized, but there's no sense of spirituality to it. It's all about magic instead of spirituality, and so it becomes like a superpower. It's almost like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is to a large extent about working through spiritual powers that come out of a bottle or a spider or a nuclear vat instead of something more spiritual. And then you have The Last Jedi, which is instead like, okay, yes, the Force is a thing, but everyone that you grew up with lied to you. So that's the evangelical Star Wars, which is entirely, my theory there is entirely backed up by Rian Johnson being like an evangelical growing up. He was a youth group kid. He
Really?
tweeted about this recently. He was talking about the various Christian music he listened to growing up, and I'm like, this explains everything about The Last Jedi, which is totally about Christian homeschoolers who just like have no social life and live with a very very overbearing preacher who won't let them hold hands. And this is actually my friend Sarah Moore's theory, and we've gone back and forth about this, but yeah, it's just like there's a very evangelical vibe about The Last Jedi of just like, okay, well, everything I was told growing up was a lie, so now what? And speaking as someone who finds both prosperity gospel and evangelicals rather tedious, I'd much rather be over with the sort of Dave Filoni true believer. And the good thing about Filoni is people can still tell him no. He's the young George Lucas.
Well, yeah, I mean, Filoni definitely loves everything about Star Wars. Probably, I don't want to say too much. There's no such thing. Because you get those people that can name every single person in the cantina scene with every single alien in the cantina scene. Maybe that's knowing slightly too much about Star Wars, but I mean, yeah, I can't think of anyone who loves Star Wars more than he does. At least, especially in the way the fans do.
Though it might, and it's also partly just that, like, we only really have three choices right now. Just like between the three of them, I would choose Filoni. But I would love for there to be more serious filmmakers out there that come out with real creative visions. I don't want it just to be Filoni or or to put everything on with him, because ultimately he's gonna make some sort of dumb move, and everybody's gonna hate him then, and then he's gonna be canceled, and that'll be that. But
no.
Well, I mean, it's just something that I would love for there to be an injection of new talent and people that want to try all sorts of different things, and that's how we're going to end up with a Star Wars rom-com.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think Disney's trying to find like original talent to be that kind of creative voice, and they thought they had it with Rian Johnson, but it's clear that as much as I like the guy, his vision is very, very controversial, and I don't think they're gonna necessarily want to bring that back. They're gonna see 100% of the American population voting for Baby Yoda on election day next year, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, okay, that's what the fans want. This is what they're giving 100% positive feedback on. So maybe we move towards the future is gonna be Jon Favreau is gonna be the guy who runs the giant mechanism of Star Wars. I mean, that's really that seems to be what people are happy about in any case."
Yeah, it seems to be.
Which that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I mean, I will add as a final defense of The Last Jedi that, given how bad most of blockbuster cinema is, I will take even something I don't agree with or incoherent that's interesting over something that's completely vapid, which seems to be so much of what Disney is happy to provide nowadays. You know what I mean?
Yeah. R.I.P. Scott Derrickson's Doctor Strange 2.
Well, that's a whole can of worms in and of itself, because I'm sitting here like, are we under any delusions that movie would have been like a great masterpiece? Because every single time Doctor Strange has not been in his own movie has been more interesting than Doctor Strange in his own movie.
I feel like if we get into this can of worms, we'll probably be talking all night, because I love Doctor Strange, and I think it's like a top 5 Marvel movie, though that's not saying much because there's only been one good Marvel movie.
I appear to have stumbled on your toes. I apologize.
It's a great movie.
It's not bad. It's to me it feels like it's one of the second tier ones, as far as I'm concerned, but
I do hear, like, people tend to love it or hate it. I just think that it's one of the better ones, though. I also only think that, like, 2 Marvel movies are really genuinely, like, great movies. And, well, maybe, like, there's a top 5 that's pretty solid, and it's in the top 5 for me. But everything else I just find kind of like a mediocre movie.
My grand theory of Marvel is that there's 4 great movies, or arguably 3 to 4 great ones, and you can always tell it's because they're the ones that culture just completely contorts around. The original Iron Man, Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, and arguably Black Panther. Arguably, because that one obviously has is more of a cultural phenomenon than the rest. But with the first 3, these were characters and ideas that no one thought would be interesting or would work, and then overnight everyone was quoting them. Everyone wanted more, and it just became a monster success as a result of it. And the only reason I would say Doctor Strange is not one of the better ones for me is that it as a movie, it doesn't hold up on its own in that kind of caliber where it's changing the world around it. Whereas when I saw Doctor Strange in Thor Ragnarok or Infinity War, I appreciated the way his character contrasted to other characters and wasn't just kind of brooding and angry for most of the plot.
Yeah, the reason I like Doctor Strange is that it's one of the more spiritually interesting movies in the Marvel universe, and that it, it talks about materialism and it talks about spirituality, and it's also visually just mind-boggling and eye-popping in a way that most of the movies, at least in that particular phase, were not. And so it's, I think Tilda Swinton is like possibly the best mentor that the series has produced, and that she's just really unexpected and just kind of quirky and otherworldly, but not in a way that you've quite seen before. I mean, the origin story is pretty typical, and you can see the beats coming from beat to beat, but it also, and this is one of my favorite things about it, it instead of making the third act about the hero figuring out how to punch his way out of the problem, it really does make it about how the hero can think his way out of the problem. And so there are a lot of pretty much every action sequence in the thing has some sort of way in which the characters are thinking about it and trying to puzzle their way out of things. And that just makes it really interesting to watch, from the hospital sequence, fighting and jumping back and forth between dimensions, and then ends up, like, I think, using a defibrillator to like electrocute the guy. And then there's the scene where he's jumping back and forth between portals, dropping guys in and out. And then the final scene, which is again, it's an interesting stand down between him and Dormammu, that involves self-sacrifice, and it's a thematic finale that isn't just about let's fight all the bad guys and figure a way out of it. So I just think that it's thematically coherent. It's visually interesting. It's spiritually curious. The characters are usually pretty good, though the plot it does suffer from plot stuff a little bit. But I can see why it doesn't come off as like a significant film, because it did sort of seem to fade into the background as along a lot of other ones.
I mean, I'll concede that it being its discussion on materialism is one of the more interesting aspects of it. My only problem with that is how the villain kind of throws that discussion on materialism and kind of throws it out of balance, because him being in the film kind of serves as a contrast to the idea that wanting eternal life and wanting something that's more that's greater than the sum of this world is also a bad thing, at the same time that the movie is suggesting that reaching out into the world and going beyond the material is also a good thing. So I'd say that there's at least some kind of tension there in terms of what the film is saying about spirituality and the afterlife and that such.
Yeah, I think that it's rules for how the characters interact with their powers are somewhat inconsistent, because there is this idea that you can't use dark energy and all that stuff, but then the ancient one does it, and well, okay, it kind of worked for her, but so there's that sort of conflict, and they didn't really explore that. I think there is this. I'm trying to remember exactly what Mads Mikkelsen's plan in that movie was. that one is.
I remember it pretty well. He wants to have Dormammu come to Earth and essentially make the entire dimension immortal, so that by dissolving time or something like to that end. So time would become irrelevant, and every single person would become immortal forever.
Yeah, and there's kind of this sense that it's been a while since I've seen it, but he wants to do it in ways that violate the laws that the good guys have set up around themselves. At the same time, when you have the ancient one who has apparently already violated those rules, then your question is, well, what makes it different for her to do that than for the bad guys? And so the way that they break through that Gordian knot is with Doctor Strange's sacrifice at the end. But I do think that there's kind of some muddy metaphysics there.
Yeah, I'm curious as if they want, how or where they're going to explore that with the sequel. I mean, with Scott Derrickson leaving the director's chair, I'm kind of afraid they're going to go for like a director for hire sort of deal. Because, I mean, Derrickson always kind of felt like Derrickson was fighting up against the limitations of what Marvel would let him do. He obviously wanted to make a Doctor Strange horror movie that just went all out and let it go into weird places, and Marvel's like, no, we gotta make an action movie that we can sell to people. And obviously that's probably a big part of why they parted ways creatively. So I'm just sitting here like, okay, Marvel's gonna get the movie it wants, but is the movie it want the movie that it should be? Is this gonna be the weird experimental movie that it kind of feels like it should be trying to go for? Because, like you said, a movie like this should really shoot for the fences and go try to do something completely outlandish that Marvel Cinematic Universe hasn't done before. And this is kind of the big Phase 4 film, other than like Thor, Love and Thunder. Like, this is the one where they need to kind of prove themselves.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a big opportunity here, because it's this world of magic, and they haven't done anything with this. It's like a big sandbox that they haven't explored yet. But I'm not sure that they're interested in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here waiting for them to kind of tip their hat and explain what their big goal is going forward. And if they're going to play coy, they're going to lose a lot of people really fast.
Look, it's female Thor, okay? It's girl Thor. That's what's going to happen, and that's going to be Phase 4, and you're going to love it. I mean, I don't understand what the problem is.
Credit where it's due. I like Taika Waititi enough that I'm going to give that a shot. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh no, I mean, like, of course I'm going to go see all of them. Like this is, I I am just worried that they've run out of ideas at this point.
Uh, with that film, with Thor: Love and Thunder, I'm less worried about that one than I am most of the other ones. Whereas I mean, obviously this phase is just kind of filling time until all the stuff they want to do with like mutants and the cosmic stories they want to do post Guardians 3 and stuff like that. That's clear to me. I think that's where they want to go, but they couldn't do it until they got James Gunn back, and they couldn't do it until they start getting the X-Men like locked down. So they're just like, okay, we're gonna release like 2 years worth of Marvel movies just to keep people busy, and that's why all these movies kind of have like nothing going for them. It's just
It's
lots
like,
of,
here's Black Widow.
yeah, you've been asking for this for years, and I'm like, okay, I'm great. I mean, I know a lot of people that really want to watch this movie, so I'll definitely go see it.
I'm like, yeah, now she's dead. Of course I want to see this story that is a prequel to all of these other stories that actually mattered to the universe. Yeah, it's going forward, these movies just got like, yeah, they feel a little bit like filler.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much what they are because they can't. They're like what's probably gonna end up happening is they're gonna talk. They're gonna create another couple of cosmic franchises, like bring in Starjammers or something like that, and then the movies are gonna start doing like big interstellar space wars and alien invasions and stuff like that, and start relying on that kind of crazy side of the comic books, and that could be interesting, but
Yeah,
it's gonna take a
and
while.
give it 5 years, and after Robert Downey Jr. has done Doctor Doolittle, like number 16, he decides, you know what, I'm going to come back as Tony Stark's ghost, or life model decoy or something, and so the future.
Why did he want to stop being Iron Man just so he could start play Doctor Doolittle? Like, what the?
That man just needs a new agent. I mean, I don't know what the problem is with his project choice, because he just hasn't done anything amazing in a long time. I mean, like, he really needs to be still making Sherlock Holmes movies, but even in those, like, they're kind of getting zanier as they go. He's becoming Johnny Depp, and this is not how I want his career to go.
He needs like a serious agent who gets him on board with something like, I don't know, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang again, or maybe book him for a couple of serious movies so we can actually reestablish that he's a real actor, because he's gonna wind up in the pits really really quickly if he doesn't figure this out. Because no one's gonna go see Doctor Doolittle, I don't think.
Yeah, though to be fair, like, it was just a sheer marketing disaster. They obviously have no idea what they're doing with it.
Yeah, good grief. So having thoroughly buried the lead on this podcast, who's gonna win Best Picture?
Oh, well, I mean, my vote is for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, there you go. I mean, but yeah, I'm starting to get the point
And
where
then they're gonna say, wait. We misread. It's Little Women.
Oh yes, I forgot Hannah's a horrible sexist, so I couldn't have figured it out without her.
Yes. Well, they'll misread the card like they did last year, and they're gonna make it a tradition now, and just figure out who they want to fake out first.
We'd like to retroactively declare Black Klansman the best picture of the year, even though it was for last year.
Mandalorian receives Best Picture.
I would give Chernobyl Best Picture. It was the best thing on film in 2019. So, but yeah.
Baby Yoda wins Best Actor.
And all of the did you see the meme of him winning the 2020 election? Because apparently he's like more popular than every single Democrat.
Imagine.
He's more popular than every single Democrat on Twitter. So they're like, Baby Yoda wins 2020. Okay, but
I wouldn't be surprised.
But yeah, I hate to cut off, but I'm kind of starting to fade on this end. Do you want to just plug your stuff real quick and then call it a night?
Yeah, I think it's probably winding down. I think we've probably weeded out all of the weaklings who aren't interested in hearing us drag Star Wars for 30 minutes at this point anyway. But anyway, If you're interested in the projects that I'm involved in next year, there's really only one I can talk about, but I'm the primary editor for a couple of books right now. But one of them is called The Poetry of Strangers. That's going to be out in June. It's about a traveling poet who went around the country busking poetry. Go out on the street with a typewriter and ask people if they want a poem, and as it turns out, quite a few of them did. And so he really met a lot of people and learned a lot about the sort of things that Americans care about, and learned that people aren't really that afraid of poetry when it meets them where they are. So I'm really excited about that project. We just settled on the cover and kind of all that squared away, and so all steam ahead on that. So anyway, it's an exciting project.
And she's on Twitter.
And I'm on Twitter. Oh yeah, yeah. Come and follow me on Twitter. I just passed 2,000 followers, and so it's a small but committed fan base, of course.
Come follow the weekly adventures of her trying to load a television onto a subway in New York City.
Yeah. Things like that. All sorts of good content.
Hey, well, got you on the podcast and into the weekly standard, so
that's true.
Most Twitters do not get that combination of things, so it served you well. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Have a good night.
Oh, thank you for having me. Good night.